First technical error of the night. See, that's why I need my producer. So, producer Kaylee, next week you're back for the show. You can all hear me now, I trust. I'll start over and let you guys let me know that you can hear me. Um, this is Law with Lucas on Wednesdays with Lucas Thompson, the American populist, for Primetime Patriots. Like, share, love, care, whatever you got to do. Heck, put an angry face up, whatever you got to do. Get this video in front of as many people as possible. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys letting me know there was no sound. That's totally my fault. I'm a terrible producer on this show. Um, I'm a guy. I don't multitask nearly as well as I probably should. So I appreciate that. Hey, everybody. Wow, lots of people commenting already. We got Tony and John and Diane, Shelly, hi, Shirley. Let's see, lots of people. Sally, hello, Amy. Donald, fantastic to have you on here. Ruben, Shasta, John, numerous people. We got Lubbock, Texas. We got all kinds of folks. Oregon, hello. I've been to Oregon. Let's see, where have I been in this beautiful country? First of all, let me say this. People ask me all the time, where would you like to travel if you could travel anywhere? And I think they expect to hear Tahiti, Fiji, Antarctica, I don't know, whatever. And those places are probably fine. Paris, whatever. I love the southeast part of this beautiful country. I love South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, northern Florida. I love the whole area. Um, Not to say other parts of the country aren't beautiful. I've been to Washington, Oregon, Utah, California, Idaho, Montana. I've been pretty much everywhere. I still owe Arizona a visit. I'll be coming to see you folks in Arizona before too long. And then the eastern seaboard and the northeast part of the country. I haven't spent a lot of time up there. I've been up there, been up to Toronto a couple times, so I've been through parts of New York. But hey, Christine, Rich, Michael in Michigan. Hey, I've been to Michigan plenty of times. I lived in Michigan for a year. So fantastic to have you all on here. I truly appreciate it. It's great. Somebody asked me one time, actually, they asked me again today, how do you know if somebody is enjoying what they do? Well, I think one of the ways to tell if somebody's enjoying what they do is the engagement. I absolutely love lots of engagement from you folks. I love seeing questions. I get questions all throughout the week in Facebook, primarily on Facebook Messenger. People send me memes, which I absolutely love. Hey, Mel, Oklahoma. Heck yeah, strength in numbers. Absolutely. So I get memes, I get questions, and I love it. So this week, I had a lot of questions about the Detroit superintendent who was talking about CRT, critical race theory. I had a pretty good back and forth with somebody who isn't really sure if critical race theory is real. And I've found that the people who aren't sure if it's real really don't know what it is. And I think once they know what it is, they see it and they see how it is prevalent in, particularly in education, because that's where they try to get kids hooked as fast as they can. But you see it in jobs now, from numerous sensitivity trainings that companies like Google and Walmart and, all these Fortune 500 companies are doing. It really permeates our lives today. So the real question is it good? Is it bad? Is it somewhere in between? Does it have good parts? Does it have bad parts? So on and so forth. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about CRT and what it is and how you can see it coming and what you should do to stand up and fight against it if it's being taught in a way that's not respectful of our constitutional system we've got in the United States. So get ready for that. But before we get into a little bit of detail and a little bit of depth there, let me talk a little bit about some news. First thing I want to talk about is what I fully intend on doing a show about probably next week. There was an article in the Atlantic, which you guys know me. I read everything. So I read the left, the right, from Slate to the Atlantic, the Huffing and Puffington Post, and on and on and on. I read it all because I want to know what they think. I want to know how they think. I want to know the best way to combat the nonsense, like this article I'm about to talk about, that they constantly spew. This article's title is Trump's Next Coup Has Already Begun. January 6th was practice. Donald Trump's GOP is much better positioned to subvert the next election. So, what I'm going to talk about when I get into this, and I'm going to do that next week, is I firmly believe, and I've believed for a long time, that the left, American Marxists, liberals, whatever you want to call them, are some of the most narcissistic people as a group that you'll ever meet. There are individuals on the left who are not. They're not that way. They truly believe the stuff that they're speaking about. They believe that the Democrat Party stands for change, for improvement of lives, and other things. And I've met those people, and frankly, many of them I really like. And then there's the leadership. The leadership is extremely narcissistic. They will point at you and say, "How dare you attack our capital? And how dare you, promote this violence against congressional members and staff and yada yada yada? How dare you change laws in states to make it harder for people of color to vote, for poor people to vote? How dare you? How dare?" And it's everything that they constantly complain about are the things that they're doing. Perfect example was our last election. As most of you know, in 2020, we were facing a pandemic, and we had approximately 6 to 8 months before the election to deal with this pandemic and allow people acting out of fear and in irrational haste to make huge changes to their state election system. So they did, many did, particularly in Democratic enclaves of swing states. And they did plenty of manipulating of the system from state secretaries of state openly changing election law on their own to, quote, make it easier, end quote, to vote. In reality, all they were doing is taking away all the safeguards for cheating. I mean, everything from dropping off votes without handing them in person to electors and officials that were that were put in place to check for the veracity of the documents that were being submitted, signatures on mail-in ballots. I mean, numerous things that they overlooked in order to let all these people vote who couldn't vote because of a pandemic. So we saw this happening. We brought all these cases, we put it in front of judges, and most of the judges said, we're not going to do anything about it because it's moot. It's only because of the pandemic. It's not likely to happen again, so we're not going to touch it. And a lot of them kicked it out. The Supreme Court did it. The court in Pennsylvania said, well, you're probably right, but it's too late to do anything about it, and we're not going to disenfranchise the people who voted, so kick rocks. Everything that the left did to manipulate that election is the things that show up in this article in the Atlantic. And next week, I'll get into it, and I will point out exactly the lines in his story that are the things that they did, that they now think, holy crap, we gave the roadmap to Donald Trump and Republicans in swing states to do exactly what we did. Here's the difference. We won't. We don't have to cheat to win. Our ideas are good enough to win on. But what you did is you showed us how you're going to cheat and how you intend to cheat. So we'll never let that happen again. Now, I can already hear several of you yelling and screaming, saying, can't do it again. Of course they'll do it again. You're probably right. In some areas, they will do it again. But in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, even in some states that Trump handled very well, Florida, they have made changes to electoral law. Georgia, swing state that Trump lost, they made changes in Georgia to make sure that it's harder for people to cheat, even in a pandemic, if we end up with one again in 2024 or beyond. So, like I said last January, it's not time to go and try to burn down the Capitol. It's time to stand up and have and expect our state legislatures, particularly in swing states, to change the law or enforce the law that's already on the books to ensure that this kind of cheating doesn't ever happen again. We know their playbook. You can't complain if you know the rules before the game starts. We know the rules. We know the way that they're intending to cheat. If we let it happen again, it's on us. So next week we'll talk about that. But this week, everybody, let me read the questions real quick and make sure that there isn't anything. Migrants turn states blue. Possibly. Many of the migrants are ending up in Texas, some in Michigan. So yeah, I guess you could say that some are ending up in swing states. But here's the deal: a poll came out today that said Hispanics are almost 50-50 now in terms of how they would vote, whether it's with Republicans or with Democrats. And I would say it's probably even leans a little deeper to the right if you ask them about specific policy initiatives. So I think if the right sticks to the ideas, they're going to do pretty well with the Hispanic community because many are very conservative. They're very intelligent as a group. Certainly not monolithic. Not any more monolithic than Caucasians or African Americans or anybody else. But I can tell you, most of the groups of Hispanic people that I've spoken with over the years are very keen to what's going on. They don't like illegal immigration any more than anybody else. They're usually fairly religious, and they like to stand up for the unborn and for people who are taken advantage of, very similar to the rest of us. So as a group, as a whole, I don't have any issue with Hispanics. Now, there's other groups immigrating from Afghanistan, from the Middle East, from Southeast Asia, and elsewhere that they're going to have to figure things out for themselves. I just trust people much more than the left does, and I think if they're allowed to understand what's happening, if they're given the opportunity to educate themselves, if people like you and me are engaging these folks and not trying to ostracize them, then there's going to be real inroads to any community. Because I'm telling you right now, whether it's poor people in white communities or very educated African Americans in historically black communities, when I speak with them and they care and I engage and they engage, it's always a good conversation, at least in my experience. Sometimes we don't agree, oftentimes we don't agree, but they'll conversate, they'll engage, and we can't ask for much more than that. Some people out there are never going to change. They've got it in their head that something is something that it's just not. And we're going to talk about that in a minute with CRT. But we can't do anything about them, and we certainly shouldn't waste our time trying to explain things. We just need to continue to engage, and that's what we're doing. Okay, so that leads me right into talking about critical race theory. I've done a show on this before. I know a lot of people may tune out because this is a topic that people really aren't sure yet if they should be concerned, if they should care about it, if it's a real thing. I mean, a lot of people, even on the right, really aren't sure what to think about critical race theory. So let me explain it as simply as I possibly can. First of all, it's very real. The probably a Democrat, but the superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools, or one of the superintendents, came out last week and admitted as much. He said critical race theory is embedded throughout our academics, throughout our curriculum, language arts, art. I mean, even physical education, they find ways to fold in CRT. How does that look in school systems? Well, it looks like this. You guys, most of you have probably read To Kill a Mockingbird, right? The idea is that there are good people who will stand against what's wrong, stand up for what's right, and good people can take bad situations and make them better. I know that's not what the whole book is about. There's so many other themes that permeate that novel, and it's a great book, and I've read it. But here's an example of how critical race theory in a curriculum might look at that book. If instead of focusing on the positive themes that were intended by the author, if you turn around and say, okay, here's how bad it was back in, whenever the time period is for the book. Boo Radley was this, and all these different things happen in the novel. Compare that to today. Show me examples of where African Americans are mistreated simply because of the color of their skin. So to me, right out of the gate, talking to freshmen in high school immediately about race relations, negative race relations, um, with a book like that that's meant to create a positive thematic, uh, reference, is right away going to be suspect to me. But if you were to turn around and say, how has that improved since whatever, 1960, 1955, 1940, 1920? What changes have happened? How has it improved? What do you think would happen today if somebody was wrongly accused of something? Who would stand up for that person who was wrongly accused? And you lead that to a discussion that shows how the American justice system has improved, you'd be in pretty good shape. But that's not the effort. That's not the goal. And let me explain. So the critical race theory basically started in the 1970s at Harvard Law. If you can get past that part to listen to the rest of what I have to say about it, you're better than many, including me for many years, because I first heard about this when I was in law school, probably in 2007. So what's that, 14 years ago? A teacher introduced critical race theory by saying, what do you think is the goal for um, the ultimate promise of the equal protection of the 14th Amendment? And most of us jumped right to Martin Luther King. It's for people to be judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. It's where no state would ever make or enforce any law that would abridge the privileges and immunities of the citizens of the state, blah 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 blah. The 14th Amendment, right? That's the goal. And she said, nope, let me show you something. And she draws this scale on the board, 1 to 10. 10 being what we've now come to learn is titled anti-racism, anti-racist, and 1 being basically white supremacist. Well, Martin Luther King's standard was a 5. And I know some of you have heard me say this, but it's a good refresher. In critical race theory, the idea that judging someone by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, is not anywhere near the ultimate goal of critical race theory. It's not even an admirable goal for anyone to even teach to anyone else. Why? Because what critical race theory is basically there are 2 groups, and it's almost anti-civil rights if you think about it. If civil rights was a movement to come into the fullness of the 14th Amendment and incorporated to the feds through the 5th, and understand that people should be treated and have equal opportunity in the United States, if that was the civil rights movement and the goals of the civil rights movement, then critical race theory would be almost anti-civil rights or anti-American. It's where identity is first, and there's two identities. There's the identity of a minority. In this case, in most references for CRT, it's actually, they call it blackness, or someone who is actually black, versus someone in the majority. And I think I wrote this down somewhere. They've got a name. So the name of a member of a minority group would be minoritized, and these are their words, not mine. A group in the other side, the other group would be what they call privileged, or they call them exploiters. I've heard exploiters more than privileged, but it's basically a privileged group. So right out of the gate, CRT is about pitting one group against another, not based on ideas, at least initially, but based on identity. It's not based on any kind of humanity. It's based on identity. Humanity is second if it's understood at all. Um, and really, it can't be someone in a minoritized group, or at least not a minoritized racial group, because it's not a black person who doesn't accept or understand the cause that they adhere to. So, for example, and I'm better with examples on this kind of thing, but Kanye West shows up with a MAGA hat on and says he's not brainwashed and everything else. And what is the first thing everybody says from the left to Kanye? Not have Doesn't have anything to do with him being black or the type of music he wants to make or anything else. Straight away, their first the first things that they say to Kanye are that he's not black. You remember many people coming out and saying, Kanye, you're not black. I remember Joe Biden saying, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, and on and on and on. What they're really saying is blackness is part of it, but the cause, understanding the principles of American Marxism and being supportive of those principles, is what you have to have in conjunction with your minoritized status to truly be part of a minoritized group. So if you're black but you don't buy into that way of thinking, you ain't black, right, Joe Biden? Um, it doesn't necessarily mean you're privileged, but it means that you're not down with the cause, with the struggle of critical race theory, which is to take positive strides toward anti-racism. So a lot of people have written about this stuff, and there's some quotes here, like from people like Richard Delgado, Gene Stefancic. I can't really pronounce the name. It matters very little to me who wrote it. The ideas are what's important, but they say critical race theory, this is a quote, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order. And they don't mean liberal like left wing, they mean the classic liberal sense, liberty, think liberty. The very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, enlightenment, rationalism, and the neutral principles of constitutional law. So at its very core, it's anti-American. I mean, it's self-proclaimed anti principles of constitutional law or neutrality, principles of constitutional law, legal reasoning, enlightenment, rationalism, and other things that they deem to be uh, empirical and colonial in nature, and basically European and um, white supremacist. So one picture I can kind of put in your head to kind of think about this is in the 16th century, Europeans started to explore and ultimately colonize North and South America. Let's just focus on North America, but South America, there was a lot of the same things going on. In primarily in agrarian areas, which is why it ended up being primarily in the South. Um, as the Industrial Revolution kind of came along, any industrialization toward the end of the 19th century, maybe a little bit sooner than that, basically around 1850. As soon as that kind of started, most of the agricultural slavery that was happened in the South. Um, but that being said, up until that point, there wasn't a lot of talk throughout Europe or other parts of the world, probably because there wasn't a lot of um, travel and colonialization of those areas. But race just wasn't that big of a talked about factor. As slavery became an issue in North and South America, it was all about race. Racism had its heyday in the 19th century. And almost immediately, as soon as that began, North America, the United States of America more specifically, began to break the chains of slavery, culminating in the Civil War. Following the Civil War, we had the Civil Rights Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and multiple efforts to end slavery as an institution in the United States, which we successfully did. What happened after that, unfortunately, was that the country still went through another almost 100 years of ideas like separate but equal. So the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that as long as the um, accommodations were equal, they were allowed to be separate. So we had this mega division among races in the United States for another 100 years. And we started fighting against that too, almost immediately. I mean, the progressives made that a point. Now they kind of played lip service to it through the early 1900s, but it was always spoken about. And then it ultimately really got going around 1950 or thereabouts, culminating in the the Civil Rights Act and civil rights movement of the 1960s. But the idea that I'm trying to make very clear is we have never made a movement backward. It's never been about how can we figure out a way to separate the races further? How can we create institutions to make sure that certain people don't have certain opportunities, any people, doesn't matter, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, any group of people, we've never decided we're going to do these things to make sure that this group of people is treated better than that group of people as a forward moving institutional idea. That's just not been the goal. The goal has always been the opposite. It has been equal protection under the law. And how do we make that real? We incorporated it to the federal government through the Fifth Amendment to make it more real. We had Brown versus Board of Education that overruled the precedent in Plessy to make it more real. We had the civil rights movement where white people marched with black people and multiple other races marched together to fight for equality and fairness. But we were always talking about fairness. There's the famous sign that the black man marching in the civil rights march held up a sign that said, "I am a man." The point was to focus on the humanity, not the identity. So what are we doing so many years later? We have people out there that literally argue, America, you had 400 years of opportunity to get this right and you didn't do it. So now we are going to focus on identity. We want to focus 100% on identity. We want you to understand that your identity as a white person is an oppressor. Your identity as a white person is how did they put it, an exploiter. And what are you going to do about it? The famous example is a white person and a black person walk into a store, a shop, let's call it a clothing store. If the clothing store owner walks up to the black person and helps them first, they're racist because they think the black person's going to steal from them. If they walk up to the white person to serve them first, they're racist because they went to serve the white person first. It's a no-win situation. The only way to truly win in that situation is to acknowledge your position as an exploiter and specifically do things to make life better for the black person because they are a minoritized person. How in the world does taking positive action toward being racist end racism? On the back of NFL football helmets, it says end racism. How long is it going to be before it says anti-racism? How long is it going to be before it says, are you an exploiter? The point is, we can't ever let it get there. We can't ever let critical race theory and the idea that identity is more important than humanity take hold in this country. The fact that Democrats across the leadership spectrum were saying CRT is not real. It's a dog whistle for the right. It's something that only happens in master's level classes in college. It's something that only happens in law school. They were saying that for years. Many of them still say that, denying what we see with our own eyes. Even when our kids were bringing home books, there's schools in parts of the country that have Ibram Kendi's anti-racism as required reading in high school. So even as that's happening, they're trying to tell us, as liberals often do, I know what you're seeing, but you're not seeing what you think you're seeing. You're falling for the vast right-wing conspiracy of the day, and they try to, um, you know, create this narrative that what you're really seeing is a figment of your imagination. Then they will try to ostracize you as a group. Anybody who believes this is just one of them, constantly harboring division in this country. That's the only thing the left's got. That's how they try to win elections. If it's not class warfare, it's race warfare. It's not race warfare, it's age warfare. I mean, there's always some group to pit against another group. And as the great narcissists that they are, what do they do while they're doing it? They say, we're doing it. They say, you're pitting groups against each other. You're saying there's people out there pushing CRT so that you can have a boogeyman for the day. That's what they say. And if we don't continue to push and engage them on these crazy ideas, then their ideas will win. I've got a lot of notes here, and I've decided that what I'm going to do, and I'll do this probably this weekend, and I'll put it up on Primetime Patriots Facebook page. I'm going to create probably a PowerPoint of these notes for critical race theory, so that when you get asked, what is critical race theory to you? Because a lot of leftists think that we have no idea what it is. We need to own what it is based on what they're really doing, really teaching, and really saying. But in order to do that, you've got to know what it is. So I'll put these notes together with the sources and the citations, and you guys can take a look at it for yourselves. But you need to at least understand it, because that's part of winning this game, is understanding what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're pushing, and being able to fight back against it when they try to paint you as somebody who's just pushing some new boogeyman or some new vast right-wing conspiracy, because that's always what happens. All right, I'm going to answer some questions, and then we'll shut it down. Although it seems like it's been 5 minutes. Explain the federal judge told Biden. Okay, so the remain in Mexico policy. Federal judge has basically told the government that they can't just unilaterally end the remain in Mexico policy, and there's numerous reasons why they can't. I'm not going to get into the legal reasoning, but the idea is basically that remain in Mexico as a policy has to be reinstituted by the Biden administration, and I think they began doing that this week. And I've heard that Oscar L. Blue is telling people, they're still coming over. Of course they are. It was illegal before. It's still illegal. They're still going to do it. People who want to come over here illegally are going to find ways to come over here illegally. So what it does mean is that people who are caught coming over the border and who say that they're coming over the border because they're some kind of aggrieved immigrant seeking asylum, the idea is that they will have to stay in Mexico, typically in some kind of border city, or potentially some created tent city or something near the border. But they'll have to remain in Mexico until their asylum hearing or their overall process for asylum is heard or ends or something, whatever the policy ended up saying. I've never read the entire policy myself, but the idea is basically that you won't just come to the United States, claim asylum, and then be released into the United States and told you can come back in 3 years for your hearing. Because that's essentially what Biden wants to do, is he wants to say, we'll get their information, we'll set a hearing for them, we'll send them out to the United States to be as productive or unproductive as they're going to be, whatever, and we'll see them again sometime down the road. If they never see them again, we're not going to go hunt them down or chase them down or anything else, because that's not what we do in the United States. And even if we did, as long as they make it to a sanctuary city, or somewhere where they can claim some kind of sanctuary status, we can't go in there anyway, so don't worry about it. I mean, we're trying to put a stop to that. We're trying to slow the flow of people who would openly violate our laws before they've ever even stepped foot on our soil. Those people are not bound to be productive members of this society. And frankly, whether they're hopping the line on people who are doing it legally or they're not, either way, why would we want people here who their first act coming to America is to do something illegal? Plain and simple for me, not so plain and simple for the left. Um, let's see, I'm sure we've got other questions up here. Um, Lots of stuff about January 6th. Maybe I should have done this show about the January 6th stuff, because I think that stuff's going to be very important and very timely. But CRT is too. CRT came up in the news, and it's something that's not going away anytime soon, because anytime the left can create a tenet, again, remember, I subscribe to the idea that liberalism is basically a religion to these people. And one of the tenets of religion is global warming. Well, not so much. Why? Because the minute we started proving global warming wasn't real, we decided, okay, well, how about just global climate change? We know the climate's changing. For crying out loud, Kansas has limestone in it the size of the Empire State Building. Why? Because it was under an ocean for a long, 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 long time. Why? Because the earth heats and cools and heats and cools. We're in the middle of an epic of, I don't know, cooling to one degree or another right now over a long period of time, to show a little bit of an increase in heating. Could it be bad? Could it be good? We compare it to rock samples and soil samples, and maybe it's terrible, but maybe the weather is accommodating the climate growth. Who knows? All I know is, whether the globe heats or cools, we need to be on the right side of this issue. So let's just call it global climate change, and then we win either way. Okay, I like that. CRT is the same thing. Whether you serve the white person or the black person first, you're a racist. As long as your skin is white, you are an exploiter. If you're not part of a minoritized group, you're an exploiter. That makes you bad. That makes me against you right out of the gate. What are you going to do to acknowledge your whiteness, acknowledge your European colonialist ways, and acknowledge that the system that your forefathers created is bad? What are you going to do to acknowledge that? Uh, what? Right? Oh my goodness. Okay. So here's what I want to say. Next week, we're going to talk about this fool's January 6th article. We're going to talk about what is coming in 2022, what is coming in 2024, what have the states done, and I'll probably try to create like a PowerPoint or something that shows what the states have done that have acted. What laws have they changed? What things have they done to make it harder to cheat? How can we have confidence in the next presidential election? For that matter, how can we have confidence in the next congressional election in 2022? I mean, right now it looks very, very, very bleak for the left. It looks like 50 to 60 seats for Republicans. It looks like Kevin McCarthy is going to be a lot more conservative than Paul Ryan. It looks like we can get the Senate back. It looks like a 2024 President Trump is going to have both houses of Congress, but this time it won't be full of rhinos. We're always going to have some, but we've gotten rid of a lot of them. That's how it looks. What can they do to screw that up? What can we do to screw that up? Trump Media Group just hired Devin Nunes, or however you want to pronounce his last name, and I think it's a fantastic hire to be their first CEO. Somebody who's going to, help create and grow that brand. And Trump Media Group is a great idea. We need a media group out there that's not going to kowtow to left wing political correctness, whatever you want to call it. the nonsense that basically says we're going to censor everything that we don't agree with, and you can't do anything about it because we're just going to call it hate speech, community standards, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. If we don't like what you say and the stuff you're saying is influential, we're going to shut it down. And if Trump can put an end to that, fan bloody tastic. Whether he runs or not in 2024, that would be a huge change. And I think we've already well established that whoever runs, whether it's Trump or DeSantis or somebody else, the tenets of America first, the responsiveness to the base of the Republican Party, folks like you and me, being responsive to that group and understanding that if whatever you're doing isn't putting Americans first, then you better not do it. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. I don't think we have to worry about any more John McCain's, God rest his soul, running the Republican Party. That's just my thoughts. Now, I understand there's people running it right now that are doing some really weird things, particularly when it comes to principles in previous Republican Party platforms, like homosexual marriage, various ideals like that. And I think there's a time and a place to have a discussion about the ideologies that are going to make it into the America First ideology. But we can have those discussions without changing the fact that if America doesn't start coming first, if American responsible economics don't start coming first, if the free enterprise system of our economy doesn't start coming first, there isn't going to be a country to fight in anymore. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. All right. Yes. No, Connie, you're exactly right. The folks that came over here were fleeing a system of servitude. They were striving for liberty. That's why it's the greatest irony of all that same group of people 2 generations later are bringing slaves over from Africa and essentially owning them. They did. They owned them. They owned people. I mean, how many generations does it take to realize what you're doing is exactly what your fathers fought against? Well, if you watch Yellowstone, you'll find out it's not too many generations. Happens quickly. If you're not engaged and you're not watching for it and you're not protecting those young ears from things like critical race theory, then the ideals that you stand for are gone. It's never more than a generation away. What one generation tolerates or accepts, the next one's going to celebrate. So we have to be mindful. But we also have to understand that our ideologies cannot define us. Let me say that again. Your ideologies, no matter how strong, cannot define you politically. They guide you, particularly your Judeo-Christian philosophies, should absolutely guide you every step of the way. But politically, for this country to function, liberty has to stand at the forefront. If Lady Liberty is not in the front of everything we're doing and doing for America, America first, then what the heck are we doing it for? This is the last chance. You don't believe me? Go look at Australia. One of my kids came home and said they were learning in school that the United States was 4th on the best countries in the world and Australia was 2nd. Yeah, right. Go ask Australians right now if they feel like it's the 2nd best country in the world to live in. Liberty, folks. It's always been, it will always be about the unalienable rights given to us by our Creator to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. I will see you next Wednesday. Send me those questions. Those are the things I'm going to talk about every single week. Have a great night. God bless each and every one of you. I love you all. God bless this fantastic country. And I will talk to you all very, very soon.